Mark served me divorce papers during my second round of chemotherapy. I was sitting in the treatment chair, veins burning from the drip, when the courier walked in with a manila envelope bearing my name. I thought it was insurance paperwork or another hospital form. But inside was a petition for dissolution of marriage, filed by my husband of 15 years. No warning. No conversation. Just a set of legal documents and his signature already inked on the bottom. 2 weeks later, he married my best friend. They didn't even bother to hide it. Photos flooded social media, Mark in a tailored navy suit, Alison in a lace-back wedding dress I'd once complimented at a boutique we used to visit together. Her caption read, "New beginnings with my soulmate ring sparkles." My hands trembled as I stared at the screen, bald from chemo, 20 pounds lighter, and surrounded by prescription bottles. I wasn't just grieving a marriage. I was grieving the version of my life I thought was real. But as it turned out, Mark and Alison had no idea what they'd walked into. Because 15 years ago, when Mark and I first got married, my father, an old-school attorney with a protective streak a mile wide, insisted we sign a prenup. Mark thought it was overkill. I thought it was annoying. But my father was adamant. He said, "You never know who someone really is until they're tested. This is for the version of him you haven't met yet." Turns out, my father was right. And Mark? He never read that prenup all the way through. My name is Jennifer Carson. I'm 42 years old, an elementary school teacher from Seattle, and up until last year, I thought my life was simple, stable, even lucky. I had a husband who made decent money as a structural engineer, a cozy home with bay windows I'd always dreamed of, and a best friend who had been by my side since college. We hosted barbecues, took weekend trips, sent each other birthday flowers. To anyone looking in, we had the perfect suburban triangle: husband, wife, best friend. Safe. Predictable. Whole. But the cracks had been forming for a while, subtle at first. Mark started staying late at work more often. Said he had deadlines, client meetings, new projects. He stopped asking how my day was, started scrolling through his phone during dinner, stopped noticing when I wore makeup or made his favorite meals. I chalked it up to stress. I told myself it was just a phase. We'd been married for over a decade, this kind of thing happened. Then came the diagnosis. Stage 2 breast cancer. I remember sitting in that sterile doctor's office, listening to the words as if they were meant for someone else. My world narrowed to white noise. Mark held my hand through it, at first. He drove me to my first few treatments, brought me ginger candies, promised we'd get through it together. But somewhere between round 1 and round 2 of chemo, his hand stopped reaching for mine. That was when Alison started showing up more. At first, I was grateful. She brought soup. Sat beside me during recovery days. Helped me organize my meds and schedule. She even cried when I shaved my head. "You're still beautiful," she whispered. I believed her. I needed to. I didn't realize then that while I was fighting for my life, they were planning theirs. Mark moved out quietly, under the guise of giving me space. Said it was temporary. Said it was best for my recovery. Alison checked in constantly, asked if I needed anything. But I'd already started noticing their little inconsistencies. A text that came late at night. A scent on Mark's hoodie that wasn't mine. A lipstick stain in a color I didn't wear. Still, I didn't confront them. Not then. I was too weak, too stunned. I didn't want to believe it. But betrayal doesn't need your permission. And soon, the truth would be undeniable. The first real punch came on a Thursday morning. I was at home recovering from chemo, nauseous, exhausted, barely able to keep water down, when a florist rang the bell. I opened the door in a headscarf and pajamas, expecting maybe a student's family had sent something sweet. But the card read, "To Alison, you make everything brighter. Love, M." I stood there on the porch for a long time, flowers trembling in my hands. I didn't say anything to either of them. Not yet. I returned the bouquet to the florist with a polite lie, something about the wrong address. But that was the moment I knew. It wasn't a suspicion anymore. It was fact. 2 days later, I checked Mark's social media, a habit I had broken long ago in favor of peace. And there it was. A candid photo of him and Alison at a winery, her hand resting on his thigh. The caption wasn't dramatic, just a location tag and a heart. But it hit like a hammer. The same winery where he once took me for our anniversary. I felt something shift in me that night. Something hard, cold, quiet. Not rage. Not tears. Just the beginning of resolve. But it wasn't over. 2 weeks later, I got the papers. They were couriered to me at the hospital, of all places, right after my blood work. The nurse had just left the room when a man in a blue vest stepped in, asked for Jennifer Carson, and handed me the envelope. Divorce papers. Filed by Mark. Citing irreconcilable differences. I flipped through the pages, numb. He'd already signed everything. Already decided. No conversation, no warning, no effort. That evening, I saw it, a tagged photo of Mark and Alison in wedding attire. They'd eloped. A coastal ceremony. Barefoot on the sand. She wore the very same dress I once helped her pick out, back when she thought she might marry a man named Evan. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I just stared at the screen, head buzzing from chemo and betrayal, and whispered one sentence to myself, "You have no idea what you just gave up." That night, I sat alone at the kitchen table, staring at the divorce papers spread in front of me. My hands were steady. My mind, for the first time in weeks, was clear. I thought about the house Mark and I had vacationed in every summer, the cabin in Colorado with the wraparound porch and wood-burning stove. I thought about the investment portfolio my father helped us build, the one Mark always called our early retirement plan. And then I thought about the one conversation I'd nearly forgotten, 15 years ago, 2 weeks before the wedding. My father, a lifelong attorney who believed in contracts the way other people believed in religion, had insisted we sign a prenup. "You may trust him now," he'd told me, "but I'm not writing this for now. I'm writing it for the day you might be at your weakest, and he chooses to walk away." Back then, it felt overly cautious. Even insulting. Mark had agreed to sign, barely even skimmed it, just smiled and said, "If it makes your dad sleep at night." He joked that lawyers loved to invent worst-case scenarios. But my father didn't joke. Not about contracts. So that night, I picked up the phone and called his old law firm. They answered on the second ring. I asked if they still had a copy of the original prenup. "Of course," the receptionist said. "It's archived, but we can retrieve it." "Is this about enforcing the medical clause?" I paused. "The medical clause?" "Yes," she said gently. "The medical abandonment clause your father insisted we include. If your spouse abandons you during a medically diagnosed critical illness, they forfeit any shared property or financial holdings established during the marriage." I sat in silence, blood pounding in my ears. It was real. Mark had not only betrayed me, he'd triggered a clause he never even remembered existed. And now? It was mine to enforce. The next morning, I put on a blazer over my chemo-softened frame, dabbed concealer under my tired eyes, and walked into my father's law firm with a purpose I hadn't felt in months. His old partner, Mary Ann, greeted me in the conference room with a thick folder already waiting on the polished oak table. "It's all here," she said calmly. "Signed. Notarized. Admissible. Mark's abandonment during your cancer treatment qualifies under the serious medical condition clause. That triggers a full forfeiture of his claims to jointly owned property and shared investment assets." I ran my fingers along the edge of the contract. "He has no idea, does he?" Marianne offered a small smile. Men like Mark rarely read the fine print. That afternoon, her office sent the formal notice of enforcement to Mark's attorney. I didn't call him. Didn't send a message. I let the silence deliver the blow. Within 48 hours, Mark and Alison received a legal packet outlining the updated terms: full transfer of the Colorado property to my name, immediate separation of the investment accounts, and the forfeiture of any rights to shared liquid assets, including the $1.2 million portfolio we'd built over the last decade. The call came that evening. Mark's number lit up my screen. I let it go to voicemail. Then another call. This time, from Alison. Finally, I picked up, because I wanted to hear it. "Jennifer," she started, her voice brittle. We got a letter." "Some kind of legal document?" "About the cabin and the investments. Mark says it's a mistake." "It's not a mistake," I said quietly. "But, we were going to use that property for our business," she stammered. "The wellness retreat. Mark said you two barely used it." I almost laughed. "You married a man who signed a contract without reading it," I said. "That's on both of you." There was silence on the other end. "You planned your new life on ground that never belonged to you," I added. "And now, it's gone." Click. I hung up. For the first time in months, I slept through the night. The next morning, I opened my investment account. My name was the only one on the title. The market had been kind. The value sat at just over $1.24 million. Enough to cover my treatment, my recovery, and a future that no longer included either of them. Mark showed up 3 days later. I was sitting on the porch of the house he used to call home, wrapped in a thick blanket despite the spring sun. My energy was still low from the last round of chemo, but my mind was razor sharp. When he stepped out of that silver Lexus and walked toward me with his hands in his pockets and regret plastered all over his face, I didn't flinch. "Jen," he said softly, like we were still married. Like I was still his. I didn't answer. He sat on the bench across from me. "This thing with the prenup, this clause, come on. You don't really want to go through with that, do you? You're not that kind of person." I looked at him. Really looked. The same man who left me bald and nauseated in a hospital chair to marry the woman who once held my hair back after a bad date. The same man who packed up his things while I was fighting to stay alive. "You don't get to tell me what kind of person I am," I said evenly. His jaw tightened. "It's not fair. I put 15 years into our marriage. And I put 15 years into believing you'd stay when it mattered." He sighed, tried to reach for pity. "Alison didn't know about the clause." "Neither did I. I didn't even read that stupid thing. You know that." I leaned forward slightly. "Exactly. You didn't read it. And now you want mercy for being careless?" He said nothing. "I didn't lie. I didn't cheat. I didn't abandon you when things got hard," I said. "But you? You walked out during the worst fight of my life. And that clause was written for exactly this." Mark looked down at his hands, silent for a long beat. "What if we settle? Maybe not everything, but split the investments? Keep the cabin? We already started remodeling." I cut him off. "It's not yours to split." His eyes finally met mine. And for the first time I saw something unfamiliar in them: fear. Real, financial, irreversible fear. Because Alison hadn't married a man with a future. She'd married a man who'd just legally lost it. And I'd never felt stronger. 1 year later, I stood at the edge of the same cabin deck in Colorado, the one Mark and Alison thought they'd turned into their business plan. The spring breeze rolled through the pines, and below the hill, wildflowers bloomed along the trail Mark once promised to pave. I kept it exactly as it was. Untouched. Quiet. Mine. The treatments were over now. My hair had started growing back, thicker, darker. My body still carried the marks of the battle, but my spirit? It was steadier than ever. I'd sold our old home in Seattle, moved my teaching online, and partnered with a nonprofit to tutor kids undergoing long-term hospital care. My schedule was my own. My mornings were peaceful. And every time I logged into my investment account, the balance reminded me, I wasn't just surviving. I was building something better. Mark and Alison eventually separated. I heard through a mutual acquaintance that the pressure got to them, that starting over didn't go quite as planned without the capital they'd been counting on. I didn't gloat. I didn't need to. Some losses speak loudest in silence. And as for me? I learned that love, no matter how deep, should never come at the cost of your dignity. That silence can be louder than revenge. And that real power comes not from screaming at the ones who leave you, but from standing tall when they realize they've lost something they'll never get back. Because when someone abandons you in your weakest moment, they don't deserve a place in your strongest one. And that, I've come to believe, is the best kind of revenge there is. And that's how I learned that living well is the best revenge. Did this story hit home? Tell me what you would have done in the comments. Smash that like, subscribe to EN True Tales for a new true revenge story every day. And share this with a friend who believes karma always comes back.